Welcome to the QBC podcast, where we explore new paradigms in health and science that have a meaningful impact on our day-to-day lives. I'm your host, Meredith Oak, a curious coach and mom. I started a journey to overcome chronic fatigue and found myself in a whole new quantum universe. I believe new research shouldn't stay locked away in an ivory tower, and that wisdom can be found in many places and understood by all of us. To keep in touch with this podcast, the QBC free community, our episode guide, and all the show notes, please visit qbcpod.com, qbcpod.com. Let's get together to create the future we all want to live in.
I'm super excited to have Scott Zimmerman back on the podcast. I love talking to Scott. He is a very down-to-earth guy who is also deeply researched in the effects of full solar spectrum on the human body. So Scott's background is in optical engineering. So that means he spent like 40 years working in lighting design, like screens and lights, and really looking at the physics of how different products are going to work. And somewhere along the way, he had a health issue, and he started to expand his thinking and look at how light is affecting our bodies. And he used all of his scientific training as an optical engineer and applied it to the concept of full solar spectrum and how it interacts with biology. He's now taken it down to the quantum level and is working with the scientists and doctors over at the Guy Foundation, who are doing some very interesting academic work. So he talks a lot about the science, but he's also just very committed to helping everyday people understand a little bit more about why we need to go outside. So, of course, I love that, because my whole thing is that the people need to know. The scientists learn all these things and they study it and they do research projects and then they start developing products and they start doing all this stuff. But there's no pipeline out of the scientific silo or the scientific area into the general public. There just isn't. We think there is. We kind of think like, oh, if there was something really important that the scientists have discovered, we would know. Well, no. We don't know. We kind of have to depend on like some weird combination of media and press releases, and none of the institutions are in a rush to update their education. So luckily we live in the time of podcasts and online education and all this fun stuff, so we can just go learn whatever we need to learn. But in order to do that, we got to get over this idea that if it was really important, everyone would know about it, because they just don't. And Scott totally understands that. So he's out there, God bless him, writing and doing interviews and trying to share this information because it's so super important. So he does get very technical. Okay. So if he starts talking about like photon-assisted quantum tunneling and you're like, what? Don't worry about it. Just let it wash over you, and just know that he is like getting into the mechanism of why it's important to pay attention to our light. If this science does interest you, you're going to love Scott, and you should think about studying this in a little more depth. So the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology, the certification registration is open, and the point of it is to provide a forum for practitioners who want to become confident and well-versed in a structured, supported environment to learn the science so that you can go out and share it with your clients, integrate it into your practice, do whatever you need to do. So the podcasting world is like the press release for all of this. But if you really want to take it seriously, then I do suggest studying it seriously and investing the time and money into doing that. Okay, so here is my interview with Scott. Now, one quick thing. During this interview, my cat shows up. I try to get him to leave. He doesn't want to leave. His name is Puck. He's a gray tabby. He is delightful. And he does this really funny thing. I don't know if any of you have a cat that does this. Let me know, because everyone is just amazed. He likes to come on walks with us. So when we go out, I go out in the morning to walk the dog, like when I first wake up, and then I go out later to walk my daughter to the bus stop. The cat comes, he follows us. And at first I was like, okay, well, he's just tracking his food source because I I give breakfast. So started to give him breakfast first. He still comes on the walks. He follows us along, and our neighbors pull over and like roll down their windows of their cars, and they're like, is that your cat? Is he on a walk with you?" Yes, he follows along behind and all the way, no matter how long we walk, no matter how far we go. It's the funniest thing. Anyway, I just wanted to share that because if you're watching this in the video format, you will see the cat. All right. Enjoy, my friends. Don't forget to visit bondcharge.com for whatever you need to support your circadian rhythms, especially blue blockers. And also, there's some links in the show notes of how to find Scott's light bulbs because he also makes circadian friendly light bulbs. He also talks about this kind of new sensor that tracks all kinds of metrics in our bodies on a minute to minute basis. That's very different from like what an Oura ring or any of those things do. And so I put the link to that in the show notes as well. It's in beta mode. I don't know if you can get it, but I am preempting you all, sending me messages asking about it because I know you guys will be like, what? What's this new thing? So it's the links to that are in the show notes, as well as the link to the article that Scott and I talk about that he did a series of articles on LinkedIn, which are really good if you're into the science, want to dig in a little more into what we talk about in this episode. The link to his LinkedIn article is there as well. All right. So bondcharge.com if you need stuff, QBC in the discount box at checkout, and enjoy my chat with Scott.
All right. Scott Zimmerman, welcome back to the QVC podcast. Really lovely to see you again.
Yeah. We have a beautiful warm day here. Sun's coming through.
Beautiful. Where are you again? Remind me.
New Jersey. We had 13 Saturdays of rain.
Oh, I was gonna say I have a beautiful warm day here. I'm just across the river in New York. We're right near the Tappan Zee.
Ah.
So I have your weather. It is gorgeous. And yeah, it's the rain. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So sun's out. We're in good moods.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to have you back. I love how you explain things and your energy and your dedication to like all this craziness that we're all trying to understand. So as I mentioned, I want to start with this post that you wrote recently, and I know it's part of something bigger, which you can tell me about. But there's some sentences in here that I'd love to unpack with you.
Okay.
So I think they're just like super helpful. So, okay, so I'm just going to start reading. This is what you wrote on LinkedIn. There are dozens of ways to quantify sunlight, and it matters how we present the data because it can mislead, hide, or enlighten. The impact of sunlight on the rapid increases in metabolic diseases is best illustrated using photons per second per area per energy unit. Tell the English major what we're talking about here.
Well, you have a bunch of things. Mm-hmm. And you can put them in different bins, and depending on how big the bin is, the number they'll go in, and so you have this way. And so we present data or the solar spectrum in a certain way, usually in watts per meter squared per degree per nanometer, the irradiation as a function of wavelength. And that makes this nice little peak where right in the visible, and everybody looks at it, and then you see the infrared, and it goes way down, and it looks like it's almost trivial. Now, I can take that exact same solar spectrum, and I can reorient it or rebin it into what matters to the body, which is how much energy, how many photons are in a particular energy band. Okay. Think about it like a
Okay.
solar cell. A solar cell, the solar cell guys build these cells that have band gaps. So within the band gap, photons that have that energy can generate an electron. Okay. Photons that don't have that energy don't generate an electron. Well, it's similar type things going on in the body. We have all these enzymes and activations and energy barriers that are used to regulate how the body works. It's not like everything's just a open wild west and every chemical reaction is happening fine. We have very controlled ways that we go through various, whether it be the electron transport chain, whether it be immune response. All these things are controlled using enzymes and various other things and light to essentially make us live and be healthy. When we start getting things out of whack is when we are unhealthy. And so all I was trying to show is that if you put it in terms of electron volt energy, which we call electron volt, that's the amount of energy it takes to move an electron through 1 volt of potential. And, it has a certain amount of energy. If we reorient or regraph, these are not really graphs. These are what they call histograms. Okay. And I'm sorry, it's getting a little deep, but bottom line is you can put it in the right bins that matter to the body, which is in, like I say, photons per second. When you talk about quantum, we always talk about photons. Mm-hmm. Well, now you need to also talk about electrons, and that's in electron volts. So these photons are, if we show it in a manner that is more applicable to the mitochondria, all of a sudden you get this peak at 0.75 electron volts, which is about 1600 nanometers. Now, I found this from the solar cell guys, and I was talking to Bob, and I said, Bob, what's this peak? And Bob says, well, everybody knows what that peak is. That's the hydrogen minus ion opacity window in the sun. And I said, not all of us knew that was what was going on. But it turns out that there is a particular energy band coming from the sun that in that band, there are more photons released by the sun because they're allowed to escape from deeper in the atmosphere of the sun. And this is well known to astronomers, but not well known to me and not well known to any biologists that I know of. But it turns out that it is an opportunity, and it appears based on how the body has adapted over billions of years and life forms have adapted, that's an optimum region where most of the activation energies are associated with biology actually occur. Is it a coincidence? Maybe it's a coincidence, but it looks like it's actually intentional. So essentially there's this region in the infrared where that aligns very well with what is going on a biological level as far as the amount of energy it takes to get you to move an electron in the electron transport chain or any of these other biological processes. And to see that in my opinion, changes your entire perspective as to what's important in sunlight. It doesn't mean that you don't need sunlight to see. It doesn't mean you don't need UV to make vitamin D and all the steroids. But in the infrared, and this is not the near infrared, this is farther out in the infrared, there's a kind of like this merger or this coincidence of what sun provides and what we need biologically as far as energy levels. And when we talk about quantum, then you get into this issue of it's very well understood that photosynthesis and electron transport chain is a quantum process. Okay? What happens is the electron, there are a series of barriers in the electron transport chain, and either through enzymes or just general mobility of the molecules or sunlight, that electron is allowed to jump that barrier generates some protons that help and goes through a series of these steps. Those steps are all in this region as far as energy levels. And so it appears that from everything we're looking at, that literally sunlight, doing a process called, and you can look it up as photon-assisted quantum tunneling, is essentially allowing us to be more likely for that electron to jump and therefore generate a little bit more more efficiently generate ATP, which agrees with Glenn's data, where he's shining some longer wavelength light. And it doesn't have to be any particular wavelength. It can be a lot of different wavelengths. And all of a sudden, the ATP production efficiency goes up, CO2 levels drop, are increase as well. So we know that is, so we have done something with light to enhance the efficiency of the electron transport chain.
Wow. Okay. So, cool. Okay. So cool. So a couple of things. One, I'm hearing that what you're talking about is a framework for looking at sunlight as an energy source for biology, as opposed to the traditional way of looking at it.
Excellent assessment. Yeah. Better than I did. I appreciate that.
And then second of all, if our biology lacks exposure to this specific bandwidth that you're talking about, we can't live.
Well, I wouldn't say you can't live. I mean, that's what's so beautiful about how you got energy from the sun coming in from this direction, higher energy, the lower energy. You've got our basic surroundings. Our body is sitting here at a temperature, and our surroundings are at a temperature. That's enough to where it kind of gets into the same region, but it appears, based on looking at it now from this different perspective, that there is a huge advantage associated with bringing in these lower energy photons. Because bear in mind, if you're looking at the electron transport chain, it's a less than a volt or electron volt, or the energy level is fairly low. And they do a series of hopping in order to get from one potential level down to another potential level and generate the protons. So, and those protons then drive the ATP production. But it is pretty clear from what we're looking at is that there is a role that sunlight plays in enhancing the efficiency of which you make ATP.
Okay.
And therefore, taking that away and only putting us in these dark environments, the modern cave that we have, where it's all high energy photons, in perspective, we're talking about 0.75 electron volts down here, where we're talking about going on with the electron transfer chain. We're talking about, when we look visually, it's 2 to 3 electron volts, so much higher energy. So if they come in and they get involved in the process, they can definitely kick the electron up over the barrier, but they also, the excess generates a lot of reactive oxygen species.
And that is happening when our light sources are mostly artificial and inside, and we're not outside enough? Or is that what you're saying?
It's happening when you're outside, but what it appears to be happening is that the higher energy photons are being used for important features. You need the UV, which is about 3 to 4 electron volts, to generate the things we need for vitamin D, for steroids, for cortisol, all these things. So we need that to happen. But that process is very energetic and damaging. You can get sunburned. You can get all this kind of stuff. Then you drop down into the visible, and we need that to be able to see. But again, it has enough energy to break bonds and do things that are negative. And then you get into the near infrared, and you start to see beneficial versus harmful. Still need these functions to go on up here, but the farther we get down, closer we get to the energy levels that are being used in things like the electron transport chain, the less reactive oxygen species being generated, and the more efficient we are at generating ATP and other things. So,
Okay. So what is that? How does that translate into what we should do? Like
well,
optimally. So to expose ourselves to this window that, all the astronomers knew about with the peak, and the energy cell, the solar cell guys know about with the peak, but the biologists have no idea, even though what you're seeing is that it's kind of crucial for optimal functioning of biology. So when is that?
well, I guess what I'd say is when we're out, the body is obviously designed under the assumption that we're exposed to a broadband emitter. Okay.
Okay.
In
What do you
order,
mean by broadband emitter?
broadband, sunlight, moonlight, fire, incandescence, things like our light bulbs, those type of things. Even the thermal vents down in the bottom of the ocean are broadband thermal emitters, and they follow more like a Planckian type of response. Okay, which means, not to be fancy, it just means that it's a large number of wavelengths, everything from UV all the way down into the far infrared. Okay.
Okay. So we're getting across the spectrum.
Across the spectrum.
All right.
And
And that's what we need.
And that's what we need. That's what the
Okay.
body's developed for. When you start parceling it up and there is no place in nature other than, as Bob would say, well, the auroras are narrowband. Well, yeah, they're pretty, but they're not the main thing that bother us all. But every other light source that we are exposed to has our emitter is broadband. And when I say broadband, it goes from UV all the way out to the far infrared. And so what appears based on the stuff we're seeing is that, we need these higher energies to do things like crack the cholesterol down to where we can make the stuff we need for vitamin D. Have to have that, but it's a process that is very energetic. And as you know, you can get a sunburn fairly easily, especially you and me. So the point is that the other part, the longer wavelengths, are there to deal with the fact that we have to have these other higher energy photons involved in the process, and if you don't, then you get more like what we're seeing out of the astronauts, the submariners. If you look at some of the hostages that were held down in tunnels for a year without any sunlight, you see what's happening. It degrades. We need the spectrum, the characteristics of sunlight to be healthy. And unfortunately, that's becoming less and less a part of our lives. People will sit in dark rooms with the TV blaring away that's just providing them with visible light. The incandescent lighting, the window blocking, all the things we're doing for blocking energy, the near infrared from coming into houses, are all degrading the balance that nature provides. And it's very clear, I'm still totally on the near infrared, but I'm saying that every time we move out a little further in the spectrum to longer and longer wavelengths, we're finding out that the body has a lot of stuff that it's doing with it that we don't even understand. And one of the problems, the fundamental problem to start the whole process, is we keep on showing the solar spectrum in the wrong terms, units of measure. And as soon as you do that, and I don't know if I don't think you have the graph to put up, but what Bob did is he showed it, and showed the relationship between when you start putting in an electron volts and how that kind of just perfectly marries up with what we see as the average activation energy of biological processes. And so it's to me, it's the most fundamental, amazing thing I've ever seen, as far as, it's clear that over billions of years, our biology was moving closer and closer to this peak that had a little extra energy, and it provides that extra energy in the form that we feel alive during the day. We get sleepy at night when it goes away. It's not that complicated, I won't think. It's just convincing everybody that they need to get outside a little bit and go to bed when it's dark,
Yeah, no, the practical application is incredibly simple.
Yeah, yeah.
Go go outside in the day, open a window, have lighting that's as close to broadband emitter as possible,
Well,
and
and
sleep in the dark when it
yeah.
gets dark.
I mean, it used to be that was the norm, and people, would go off to sanitariums to get more light and get more fresh air and get more, you know, good food. And now we've kind of created this about the opposite environment where you can't have this. You're not providing the full spectrum to the lit. And I would argue that it's even worse than that because we're talking about the two very different balancing act that's going on in the body. It needs these to counter the other. When you introduce just one, I did some the bio sweat sensor measurements, um, and we were looking at cortisol, and it it was amazing that you could sit in a dark room with a TV on, 10 lux, just a basic sitting in front of TV, and the cortisol was spiking all through that time. Melatonin was kind of suppressed all through that time. So I think that, there's an argument to be made that it's not just that we should do this because it's more healthy. We should get rid of what we're doing, or at least try and add some infrared back in to everything, because not having it is creating harm. And that's my biggest concern with all the metabolic diseases. One of the reasons that we're doing what we're doing is that metabolic diseases are all linked into the electron transport chain and the ATP production. And it's very clear that the longer wavelengths are a positive reinforcement of that, making it more efficient. More efficient the ATP is, the healthier you basically are. And, so I think that getting it in the right terms and looking at how biology and sunlight are mixing together, I guess one of the analogies that's used is that we're kind of like this battery system. Mm-hmm. We charge up, and that gets as Glenn's shown with his experiments, just as short exposures can have a beneficial effect over a longer time frame, because you're essentially making the ATP, the electron transport chain, more efficient, and maybe even adding in more units into where it's just operating at a better level. Taking it away
with that infrared exposure.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And
just to touch what you were saying earlier about how UV is, on the one hand, extremely UV exposure is necessary and important. On the other hand, it does cause damage. So on a sort of like a practical basis, what I notice personally is if I'm outside on a hot summer day, direct sunlight on my body feels really good for, I don't know, let's say 20, 25 minutes. And then I get the inclination to go in the shade.
Yeah.
And is that sort of what we're talking about? Like just keeping that balance, and even the shade and being outside is still having all those positive effects you described, especially on the body's optimization of ATP production. That's still happening.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, and we're going to find more and more of these biological processes that affect the immune system, that affect neurological. I mean, you said, I feel. Well,
yeah,
because your brain is basically having some response to making you feel a particular way. I mean, and, we started this out just doing the optics of looking at where light goes in the body. But now what we're finding is that, it's not just where it goes, it's also what a number of the wavelengths have very localized or absorb very strongly. There's a picture I put in the LinkedIn post here, at least recently, where, we all have black skin and white hair in the longer wavelengths. And that means that the body is trying to absorb those photons preferentially and using them for something. In particular, it looks like immune as a pathogen barrier is one possibility. But, in general, you need all the different components working together in unison, rather than we have this tendency as a scientist to do reductionist experiments. Even Glenn's experiment was done at 670 nanometers. Another one's at 1064. That's not what's happening in the body when we're outdoors. We're getting all those wavelengths together. Some are going deeper in the body, some are localized on the surface. And as we move into shade, then it shifts more into the infrared, and the visible and the UV gets absorbed more strongly by the leaves and our surroundings. So there's a shift in that general balance, but there's always something to counter the other. Unfortunately, that's not what we do now. I mean, we have said, okay, we only need from 400 to 650 nanometers to see, to read. Therefore, and
so
to watch screen.
That's what our light bulbs were like, just that.
Just that. Sunlight.
But our biology was designed for, as you said, the broadband emissions, all of it.
250 out to 6,000 nanometers. I mean, we're talking less than 10% of the spectral content is what we expose our children to every day. And they don't get out getting what the wider, especially in urban areas, it's very difficult. I understand it is. I mean, if you're in prison, they got real problems,
Mm-hmm.
And hospitals are terrible. I mean, they're probably about the worst place you could go as far as this aspect of life. But we know very strongly that ATP efficiency and ATP production is a very good marker of health. I mean, if you're operating at a high level of ATP production and health and efficiency, then it's a beneficial condition as far as our health is concerned. And all I'm saying is that we started out, just to give you a framework, UV starts here around 280 nanometers, goes down to about 400 some odd nanometers so when we start to see. 650 is what we mostly cut off for in the LEDs. Near infrared runs from 650 out to about 1,100 or 1,000 nanometers. This other infrared, so a shortwave infrared and mid-infrared, runs out to 6,000 nanometers. And while the energy level of the photons may be less at the longer wavelengths, they appear to be more appropriate to do things with biology, because those are the energy levels that the body is using to regulate all our processes. Other than seeing and generating, like I say, the UV, the majority of our bodily processes, the entire electron transport chain, has a series of barriers that are less than an electron volt, are pretty close to an electron volt, which is, very small amount of energy. You can come in with a big, heavy, a big high energy boost, and you'll have an effect, but you're going to also generate some level of damage associated with it. So, like I say, and we've only gone to 6, that we still don't quite understand even the longer wavelengths than that. And really, it's almost like a fundamental problem with science. If you can't measure it, it's hard to understand it, And
yeah,
well,
it's almost like if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. It's kind of what the sense I get from the measurers, the people who measure.
Yeah, that is what the problem we ran into. When you look at sunlight, the solar spectrum in terms of watts, then it looks like there's nothing useful going on down at the bottom. And so what do? We use that as, okay, that doesn't matter. It's just heat. We're going to only make 400 to 650 nanometers. Now what's happening? Everybody's getting these little spectrometers, and they're silicon spectrometers. Well, they only measure out to about 900. And yet people look at it and say, oh, look at this. I got some power out here at 900 nanometers. Yeah, well, what about 2,000? What about 6,000? But people have their meter, and they read their meter, and we say, okay, put it up to an incandescent light bulb. Well, it does this. It goes down. No, it didn't. Incandescents go up all the way out to about 2,000 nanometers, but their meter.
But the instrument of measurement has no capacity, so it just looks like it goes down.
Yeah, I mean, look, and so people make a judgment. Oh, we added near infrared. No, you really didn't add that much near infrared. If you're outside and you're in the shade, for every watt of optical watt of visible, there's 3 or 4 times that in the infrared. And that's the balance. So, in our light sources, we design them to have 3 to 1 because of some of the work I did. But
in the light bulbs that you make.
Yeah, because, the point is that people who have very dark skin in particular need more near infrared content, in my opinion. Children need more near infrared content because that's kind of the good stuff. And we got rid of the good stuff and put it in with the bad stuff. And then we're surprised that all of a sudden there's some issue. And how bad is it? 10, 20 years from now, you'll figure that all out, unfortunately. But we do know that I think we have been going through a grand experiment where we have taken away all the incandescents, blocked all the near infrared from coming in, and we have these metabolic diseases. I know they want to talk about processed food. They want to talk about a lot of other things, but sunlight has always been the largest energy input into the body forever. And, the fact that we have now filtered that down to such a narrow portion that it's not causing a problem, I think is absurd. I mean, I would say that there's a much higher likelihood that the effect of our lighting systems and our architecture is bigger than any processed food. There's tons of different diets out there. People eat all kinds of things and survive just fine. But this is almost like on a global basis, we're having this huge shift. And it's the antithesis of what we really know from a logic standpoint. 1800s, people were going into sanitariums and places like that to get over TB and other diseases. Because what they do, they got in more sunlight, got in more fresh air, got in higher altitude, breathing better. The idea that sunlight isn't a primary factor in what we're seeing for all these modern society diseases. I mean, all we're doing is going and showing, hey, there's a mechanism.
Yes.
Here's a mechanism, and I love your cat, by the way.
That's Puck.
Yeah.
We call him the infidel. Yes. So the mechanism, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's really the if you can show a mechanism, then people can start to quantify it. And I'm hopeful that what's going to happen is once we get some more of these biosensors out there, that people are going to start looking for themselves and finding out whether or not, how much in the sun they need to be in order to really feel good about themselves. So.
Right. Which is where measuring is very helpful, because when people see that data, like, oh, I'm in front of my TV and my blood sugar plummets, and oh, I go outside and things stabilize. One quick thing on the processed food. Here's my ideal near future vision is that the way that we are understanding processed food right now, and the huge push, especially in the United States, it's been going on other places in Europe for longer, to really get the general population to understand how bad it is to eat ultra processed food as the mainstay of your diet. If we can then translate that understanding into a paradigm shift that sees light as an equal input into our body on par with food, maybe we have a chance of reframing. And as you were talking about earlier, we need to reframe the way we think about the sun, the way we measure the outputs of the sun. If we can reframe the way we think about light from just something that we need to see to an essential life source, food source for our body, just in a different form.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to do it. I mean, essentially, our ability to operate optimally is under attack at the present time. We it's not just the emitters that we did, it's also a lifestyle shift that we've made where, kids don't go outside and play.
Yeah.
Kids don't, you gotta go to, everything is a more of a organized indoors under artificial lighting, and last thing the kid sees is before he goes to bed is a screen that has no infrared content. So over time, yeah, like I say, all we're trying to do is highlight the different mechanisms. And it's been this progression of, we started out invisible, added some near infrared. Then we got to the point we figured out that there's now this longer wavelength stuff going on. And we still have half the solar spectrum to go, basically. We're really seeing stuff at, we got out to 3,000 nanometers. We got to get out to 6 before we actually include all the stuff that's going on from sunlight. And the idea that nature hasn't optimized to take advantage of all those different energy sources is just counterintuitive. That's what nature does, and because that's called survival. The entity that can actually take advantage of something and get an advantage over another one is going to win the battle. And and I just find it really fascinating that it's not something that we have. The biologists over here, as you were talking about silos, it's an enzyme, it's a chemical reaction, it's all this other stuff. The optics guys are over here saying, we're changing, this, that, and the other, biology thing. They're not talking to each other hardly at all, And the more we find out, all I was trying to show is that, we've got this huge amount of energy associated with sunlight that can be good or bad for biological processes. And then you've got the normal biology guys coming together, and they're meeting at this, just happen to be meeting at this 0.75 EV that is a unique situation associated with the sun itself. And I just think it's fascinating and fundamental in what's going on. But you need both sides of the parties to give a little so that we can get to the truth, I guess is what I'd say.
Yeah, it's just so fascinating from a civilizational perspective that, we can have these incredible human intelligences hyper-focused in a certain area and be so incredibly well-versed and deeply understand that little area, but because still completely missing the bigger picture. And we seem to lack any kind of society level framework for pulling out and linking all these things together. Even recently, the magazine Scientific American had a cover, The Sunlight Cure. It was all about how sunlight is good for us and UV light is good for us. And then they'd have this one paragraph where the scientists were like, yeah, but we don't understand the mechanisms yet. And I'm like, you guys gotta go talk to Scott. There are people who understand the mechanisms. Go talk to Dr. Frederick Guy. But they hadn't looked yet. So as far as they were concerned, the mechanism is not understood.
Yeah, and it's a shame because we do know a lot. We know an awful lot, and it's such a perfect opportunity. This is like the a watershed moment, in my opinion, from the standpoint of the biologists and the quantum biologists to get together, because this is coming down to quantum levels, and it is, and people get scared by that. But I mean, a simple thing is to go back to the unit measure. Rather than talking about watts, talk about photons per second. It's now a quantized event. And it matters how many of those photons, what energy level they are, and what the density of them in the body is being absorbed, and how that is coupling into our biological processes. It doesn't have to be coherence and all this other stuff, in my opinion. It just start out with something simple. I got a chunk of energy. It goes here in the body, and it helps this process work better, or doesn't help this process work better. And that those mechanisms we can do. We can model them. We can put them together. And what I put in the equation, the simple little equation in there on photon-assisted quantum tunneling. It sounds really spooky, but at some level, there is a probability that small little things like electrons, and this is what I think is just so cool, is that the mass of the particle determines, and the barrier and the width of the barrier all determine the probability of an electron moving through a barrier. Now, we use barriers in our biology to time when things happen and how big of an event they are. Now, the fact that we can provide a photon to that region and add in a little bit more energy so that that electron can jump that barrier and a little bit more efficiently generate a proton, which then makes the turbine spin, is all occurring on these scales that you have to start talking about quantum effects. And they're not that, doesn't have to be that complicated. Literally, there's a great paper done out of the Guy Foundation. Nathan, I forget his last name, I think Booth, I'm not sure. Anyway, showing water molecules. And he's modeling what happens when an electron hits that water molecule. And what he was able to show is that he could actually, it affected the molecule beside it, made it a little bit more excited. It then made this one over here a little bit more excited. And before long, the electron popped out on the other side, And so we know that water is doing all these amazing things in the body. We keep it, we came out of the ocean and we carried our water with us, essentially. And in this region that we're now looking at, Bob and I are now looking at, water is the main absorber. It is the chromophore. It is actually what's absorbing the photon and moving it around, making things work. And you think about it like a whole big, one of those play gyms where they got all the balls in them,
Yeah.
And the kid jumps into the thing, and the balls move, but some of them move quite a ways away from them because it depends on how they all interact. So, I mean, what sunlight is really doing, in my opinion, is taking and charging up the battery a little bit, but really generating an environment where electron generated by the food we eat, whatever, is more likely to jump the barrier and get a proton generated to generate a little bit more ATP, and do that with the least amount of the most efficient way, I guess I'd say. So that's kind of what I think of it. But I also like play gyms and trampoline places.
The ball pits are always, I love it. And yes, I think, when you explain it like that, it just makes it so obvious that we need to be talking about biology on that level. on that quantum biologic level, and not just the biochemical level or whatever else we've been doing. It gets just so clear. We need all you guys to have like megaphones.
No, I it's why, it's like Glenn. He's started out and he was doing all these experiments on the bees and the insects. And, that's the other thing that I wish people would really understand. Get rid of your LED lights outdoors. We are doing a number on insects in particular, because if you look at it optically, all the energy going into the insects are so small that they are essentially exposed to all the wavelengths at once. We're big enough to where some of the near infrared gets down in deeper, but we're kind of have this outer shell type thing going on where most of the energy is absorbed on the outer surface skin, why our skin replaces every 21 days, blah, blah, blah. But insects are so much the canary in the coal mine on this whole thing. And I think that we're totally underestimating the impact we're having on our health by the standpoint of what we're doing to the insect population. I grew up in Kansas. When I was growing up, you drive down the road, you got grasshopper, all, clean windshields, all. Hardly ever happens anymore around here, it seems like. I was watching fireflies last night out there, and there's not near as many as I remember some of the other places. So it's just, I think that we need to get a little bit more serious about what we're doing to the environment. But in general, what Glenn's been doing is he started out with the insects, then he went into looking at cells, and then he's moved his way up into mice, and now he's doing basically all his experiments on humans and exposing them to various things and seeing, some of his latest stuff is that, he took and replaced the LED with an incandescent. Mm-hmm. And then he also did an 850 nanometer type exposure. And he was looking at color contrast in the eye. And this was just, there's still LEDs up here on the ceiling. There's just an incandescent desk lamp there where people are working and all that other stuff. And in less than a week, he was able to show a significant 20% degradation in their color contrast, ability to differentiate colors, which is Glenn's one of the world's experts on these things.
Okay, sorry. So walk me through this again. So this is Glenn Jeffries.
Yeah.
So he looked at the impact of the narrow spectrum on insects. Now he's moved to humans. And so he found that people's ability to differentiate color was degraded by working under LEDs.
In a matter of weeks, maybe
in a
even
matter
on.
of weeks.
Now, it doesn't mean, I mean, all we're doing here is generating all these different biomarkers. The body is dealing with thousands and thousands of different reactions at the same time, simultaneously. So what do? We run an experiment. Glenn's running an experiment. What he showed is that there is a huge difference. Even the 850, while it helped a little bit on some of the color contrast, it was really the incandescent that he saw the big change. And I would argue if he could actually do a controlled experiment with sunlight, he would actually see an improvement even further.
So when an incandescent bulb was added, even though the ceiling lights were still on, there was an improvement.
Yeah, the biggest improvement that he measured.
Wow. So LEDs alone, people's eyesight got worse.
Yeah.
Almost immediately. You add in an incandescent bulb and it got better.
Yeah. And, like I say.
Crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. No one knows this.
And the thing is that's one experiment with one biomarker. If we could pull up, I'm sitting here and I'm showing that cortisol levels are spiking on a couple minute intervals. One of the things I'm going to be, another thing that's coming out in this, what I'm doing is I'm doing a series of 4-part session on Bob's work and some of my work that we're going to be posting. That I posted 2 of them on so far, LinkedIn, there'll be some more. But literally, everybody thinks of circadian and the effect of light on their health as being this kind of gradual, in the morning you have high cortisol, low melatonin, then you go down in the evening, you should have low cortisol, high melatonin. And it does that in general. But again, it's another measurement thing. The sensor I have measures every 3 minutes. Okay. Everybody else is measuring every 4 hours or a day or whatever, just picking a pot. When you start looking at a high sampling frequency is in minutes, what you find is that cortisol spikes when we eat, when we do when we do exercise, when we watch TV. You have this huge spike. Well, melatonin actually has a spike too. In response, if the cortisol gets too high, all of a sudden out of nowhere, you see this huge spike in melatonin and a drop in TNF alpha, which is a cancer marker. So, because the melatonin is essentially suppressing that cancer marker. So there's so many different mechanisms that are being affected by our exposure to light, what we eat. I mean, it's all coming together. My wife and I went out to a Mexican restaurant and I had the sensor on, and you don't see it at the time. That's one of the intentions, is you don't want to actually trick the data or whatever. But literally, you could see the appetizer, then you could see the main course, then you could see it going up. And if I had a time,
I don't know if I want that level.
What?
Did you have dessert?
No, I didn't. It didn't show up either. But but then all of a sudden you get this very narrow 10-minute window of melatonin spiking up, and the cortisol drops because melatonin suppresses cortisol.
So what's triggering the melatonin?
Good question. I have no idea. It's part of our control system.
So it just is like the melatonin's like I gotta pop up and compensate for this cortisol situation. Okay.
Yeah. And maybe it's coming out of the gut, maybe it's coming out of who knows. Similar thing happens with the exercise. You do, everybody's measuring at all these hormones at such long time spells. It's kind of like take a tennis ball, take a picture, throw it up in the air, catch the tennis ball, take another picture. Ball didn't move. That's what's going on. Mm-hmm. And now with the higher frequency sampling capability we're getting, and same was true as Glenn. Glenn was monitoring every 5 to 10 minutes so he could see the change. If he waited 2 hours, there'd been no change, but that's not what's going on. There is clearly a long diurnal time constant, but there's also all these transient responses. And you think about it, just makes sense. We go do something. All of a sudden I'm going to run around the block. Number one, I'd have a heart attack, but number two, essentially everything's going to come up. And something has to respond on a time scale of minutes. That's not circadian. It's something else. Mm-hmm. And it contributes to circadian and probably is much more important in a lot of ways than these diurnal things. That's just kind of like a baseline type thing.
Yeah. That's like the overview, but then minute to minute, there's all of these other things happening.
Yeah. And to my knowledge, I don't think anybody's ever really shown that. I mean, they've known that cortisol was kind of a pulse, but I think this is the first time we've shown melatonin is actually doing the same thing on a time scale of minutes. Wow.
And so how are you measuring this? Is this a new technology that's enabling these measurements?
Yeah, it's a sweat sensor that's under development by a company called Cordy.
Okay.
Or in license, I guess is what it got.
So everyone's going to email me being like, where do I get one?
Yeah, Can we get one? Not available right yet.
Okay.
But I mean, it comes back to this whole question of what units we measure, how we measure, and we've been what we're finding is that the deeper, the quicker the more accurately you measure things in the body, the more complex the whole process is. And you think about it, it has to be. You know, if you let cortisol run rampant in your body, then you're essentially going to be in a constant state of agitation. So what is melatonin doing? Melatonin doing is it's squashing it. But melatonin only it's got its own set of controls on it, you know,
Yeah.
to respond.
And would you need to have enough melatonin produced in your body to be able to do this? So if you were if I'm just thinking through, like if I am living an indoor lifestyle and looking at screens before bed and there's street light coming through my room, would I even have enough melatonin for these processes to work properly?
I would argue no, because I think that you have to look at melatonin as a consumable. You know, it is used. What does it mainly do? It mainly suppresses reactive oxygen species, and its metabolite, after it gets oxidized, does the same thing. There's about 10 different metabolites below what you started with. So that's why it's such an effective scavenger of a reactive oxygen species. So every time you do something, you are using melatonin, or you're depleting the melatonin reserve. When we're outdoors, I would argue that, you know, you're essentially pumping it up.
Yeah.
And that's giving you a storage of it. And these are during the day type things. This is not, from the pineal gland.
Yeah.
I mean, unless all of a sudden
this is not the sleeping melatonin.
This is I got to deal with the fact that I'm generating tons of reactive oxygen species in my muscles when I'm doing exercise, and those cells themselves are generating melatonin. There's no doubt in my mind about that, you know. But the quantity consumed is huge when you think about it. You know, it has to be. So we are generating melatonin throughout the day, and during the night, when there's low cellular activity and less likely to generate melatonin, then you still have the brain operating at a high capacity. Pineal gland dumps a bunch of melatonin in to help protect the brain and any cells that are kind of damaged. At least that's the mentality that I propose. So, and it seems the data is backing me up. I mean, that's what I think is really cool.
I would also add that the actual experience of people is backing you up.
Yeah.
We deal with, I work with health practitioners and health coaches, and when they have clients who are compliant with going outside, they feel better. I'm not saying it's like a cure-all for everything, but there are very few people who don't feel better from sleeping in the dark and going outside more during the day. That's just what happens.
Well, and you think about it, I mean, in this scenario, if the melatonin is being generated in all our cells, the exercise data that we have shows that the melatonin within 10 to 20 minutes goes up and plateaus at some level if you're doing a certain level of exercise continuously. The cortisol does exactly the same thing. But then what happens? Cortisol starts to fall off after a few 10, 20 minutes of exercise, but the melatonin doesn't. So it appears that the body is always trying to generate an excess of melatonin. So what happens? You go to the beach. How many people say, I went to the beach and I just feel tired afterwards?
Yeah, I got sleepy.
I did a really great run and I feel a little tired afterwards. I did a cold water immersion. I feel a little tired afterwards. I think those are all indications that you've brought your melatonin levels up. And, they're part of this. It's eventually getting back down to baseline. But the transient response, you're getting a jump in your melatonin levels. And like I say, I mean, when I saw the data for the TNF alpha, how much it was affected, I mean, we're talking about spike downward.
Okay.
During
And the
the
TNF
melatonin.
alpha is the bad stuff.
No, it's not really. It's a marker associated with cancers. So,
Okay. I would call that bad stuff.
well, I mean, I'm sure that there are people that know it much better than I that can explain it. All I'm showing is the data.
Yeah.
The data shows that when that melatonin spike.
So the marker for cancer goes down when the melatonin goes up.
Yeah, and that's supported by a number of different studies that showed that melatonin suppresses tumor growth, things of that nature. So, I mean, all at the end of the day, what I guess I'm saying is we're now moving from these, go do something, and a day or two later, test it for us, into a time scale of minutes. And once you start doing that, you see that there's all these different processes going on, responding and you think about it, you have to. I mean, I chopped off my arm or something, some major event type thing, or even a small event. You got a burn or whatever. The body can't wait 4 hours to respond, and how's it going to do that? And what the sweat monitoring is really showing, I think, is that there's an entirely different control system that is operating on minute time scales that are pumping, that are responding to a variety of different processes or stressors that we're exposing ourselves to. So.
Right. And the more daytime exposure to broadband emitters, the better.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I keep on saying, optical, wear a hat. I mean, don't slather yourself up with a bunch of sunscreen. Wear a hat, enjoy the shade. There's a reason you like the shade. It's got a lot more good stuff than bad stuff. And, that guess is my point about the whole thing.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming back. You really are gifted at talking about this, and I think playing a really crucial role as a bridge from the scientists doing their lab work to the rest of us who really want to know and understand this, as well as creating a product that is helpful. So for people to know, they can get your lights. It's Silas.
It's NairaLighting.com.
NairaLighting.com. Okay.
Yeah.
NIRA lighting, all one word.com.
If I can convince anybody to do anything, we have a DC version that's just a little plugs in, has a lamp, or you can buy a conversion kit that if you got a lamp that takes a screw-in bulb, we can send you those, the conversion kit. It's going to last you. Basically, we give a lifetime warranty on the bulb because it's designed to last basically forever. It's set to have 2 positions, a day and a night. And, so make it very simple. And, I think it's the right way to go. If I could just convince people to put these kind of desk lamps by their laptop or workstation and just get the full spectrum. It's not going to hurt you. And it's designed to be as close as matched to sunlight as we could, even more than an incandescent, because it's got during the day, it gives you some of the blue and greens that you don't get from incandescent that are in sunlight. So I'm a big guy on ratios and balance, and that's what I like. If I could sell everybody on those, I'd be a very happy camper. So.
Yeah. And it is so simple at the end of the day, as you're saying, like the complexity of the science is basically infinite, but the actual practical application, it's like go outside more and add some light bulbs like yours that balance out, that understand that we need more of a spectrum than just the tiny little portion coming out.
Well, especially with children, because a higher percentage of their cells are getting exposed to sunlight, especially in the near infrared and the other areas. But I guess what I would like is you don't need, I mean, I guess I'll put it this way. I believe at this point that we have shown there's enough mechanisms and information out there that what we're doing now with LEDs is wrong and harmful. And, you know, is it going to make your kid die tomorrow or whatever? No. But why? You spend all this money on all these other things, but for some reason, getting a good exposure to your child outside, you know, I had a really interesting conversation just briefly about a gentleman who was trying to help battered women in Chicago, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he said, you know, women in those conditions are afraid to go outside. And we need to find ways to get that kind of, those are the people in particular, because it's, you know, that need to be exposed to sunlight on a regular basis, both for their physical health and for their neurological health. So, you know, we were talking about maybe putting conservatories up on top of buildings in some of the urban areas or whatever, planting more trees, things of that nature, having safe areas where people can just go and, you know, get a little bit. And from Glenn's work, you don't have to do it every day. You can do it just it needs to be consistent. And, you know, like I say, children are the most susceptible to it. And I think we have a responsibility to do something about that. I would ban street lighting the way they've got it now, but, you know, how you can convince the government to do that, I don't know. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the streetlights, that'd be a fantastic project. Well, Scott, we'll have to do this again soon. It's really fun, and you bring such a helpful perspective and the science and all of the things. So thank you so much for coming back, and I look forward to our next chat.
All right. Thank you, Meredith.
This has been the Quantum Biology Collective podcast. To find a practitioner who practices from this point of view, visit our directory at quantumbiologycollective.org. If you are a practitioner, definitely take a look at the Applied Quantum Biology Certification, a 6-week study of the science of the new human health paradigm and its practical application with your patients and clients. We also love to feature graduates of the program on this very podcast. Until next time, the QBC.